And on the sixth day, God created the first
Simp!
I need to warm my ears constantly to save my life, and the only material soft enough is the inner thigh of a pretty girl.
He recently got me and my boyfriend shirts.
Me and my boyfriend, she said. The queen betrayed the Simps. Nay, she outright brought them outside and publicly executed them.
The bloke that is suing Twitch because the women are too sexy. The plaintiff wants to it on his PC monitor, causing a short circuit and a small fire within the electrical system of his gaming rig and causing his apartment to black out temporarily.
This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Stay tuned till the end of this video to find out how you can snag a free trial of their premium membership and gain access to thousands of online creative classes. It's pretty awesome, trust me. Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to a long overdue video essay about pop culture or social phenomena that fascinate me, and few things fall into that category lately, like the notorious and these days widely overused term that is the simp. Now, if this is your first time on the internet, you've probably never heard of this meme before, but fear not, I am here to tarnish your purity. Because for this video, I thought I'd dive into exactly how this term came to be, the culture it's attempting to call out, and how, like all seemingly harmless things, it's mutated into this sort of catch-all insult that's just used for anything these days. Because let's never forget that the internet will find a way to eventually ruin everything. So what is a simp, you may ask? I believe the definition that blessed it into memedom was that it's an acronym for suckers idolizing mediocre pussy. But if you want a term that's a little less crass and demeaning, Urban Dictionary defines it as someone who just does way too much for the person they like. And you may be thinking, that's not so bad, I spoil my partner or spouse all the time. But what separates simps from those successful with the object of their affections is that most of the time, the simp often isn't. In fact, a defining trait of the stereotype is their willingness to express their love at the expense of their dignity, and often for no reciprocated affection in return. And despite the word not really having a gender within popular discourse and culture, this person is most of the time a straight dude. Although that doesn't mean that you straight ladies out there or people of other sexualities aren't exempt from having this fine title bestowed upon you. There are also cases of female simps or gay simps, but as the stereotype stands, yeah, it's usually straight men falling under this category. Men who, by its definition, tend to unnecessarily put women up on a pedestal. Often someone willing to beg, grovel, or literally do anything to win over the object of their affections, even when the other person doesn't exactly feel the same. It is far, far from romantic to say the least, and is annoying at best, and creepy, suffocating, and entitled at worst. According to this list of traits here by some rando on the internet, there are apparently 4 main ways one can identify a simp in the wild, or perhaps they themselves are. And that is someone, typically a guy, who puts himself in a subservient or submissive position under a woman in the hopes of winning them over even if the other person doesn't reciprocate, someone who puts too much value on a woman for no reason, someone who prides himself with chivalry just to gain sexual gratification from a woman, and or someone who's a square with no game other than rolling out the red carpet for a woman. Alright, so you get the gist. The term is commonly used to insult dudes who are overly nice to girls they expect to get with but aren't romantically successful with. And while I do believe it's a useful meme to call out extreme and inappropriate behaviors, and I do admit the name sounds hilarious, the way its definition has sort of been broadened lately, particularly by controversial communities, does bring up questionable notions around gendered behavior in relationships, but we'll dive more into that. First off, how did the term get so overly used in today's cultural lexicon? As always with most of these trends, we can thank Gen Z, but the term actually goes way back, and I mean way back into the early 20th century, where it was used as an abbreviation for simpleton, which is basically the more polite version of dumbass. Kinda tracks with today's modern definition, because a lot of extreme simpage can result in absolute clownery. In fact, the New Partridge Dictionary of Slang and Unconventional English traces it back to 1903, and it actually even appeared in the New York Times as early as 1923, when it featured a letter by what I can only assume was a proto-Karen, criticizing 2 Atlantic City clubs for having unmarried men. Those bachelor simps, it said, are afraid to take a chance and too tight to share their earnings with a wife. She sounds lovely. Jump forward a handful of decades later, and the term is then adopted by a bunch of 80s rappers like QMC, Too Short, and E40. 3 6 Mafia in particular probably made the most memorable use of the word through their song Sippin' on Some Syrup, where one of the lines goes, "I'm trill working the wheel, a pimp not a simp, keep the dope fiends higher than a Goodyear blimp." Yeah, try not to be too impressed by my rapping prowess, I know. By this time, the word started to have this connotation of someone being overly soft or sympathetic. Based on 3 6 Mafia's song, it was essentially the binary opposite of pimp. And this was further reinforced by Megan Thee Stallion's song Cash Shit, where she goes, "Bitch, I do pimp shit. Ho, you want simp shit? I should quit my day job." In 2005, interestingly enough, some use the word simp as a shortened version of sympathetic, essentially dragging guys for being sympathetic to, and I quote, "a woman's irrational problems. He is sympathetic to her petty nagging and believes it will get him laid." It's no surprise then that the word was later co-opted by communities like MGTOW and r/incels, and has been unnecessarily broadened by certain people to just lump a wide net of dudes in the dating scene, well-intentioned or otherwise, single or even taken, into the same simp category. With these people, it seems like anyone can be a simp these days if you're simply nice to a woman. And the troubling evolution of this term is pretty unfortunate, because like I said, on top of it being a funny, mostly harmless meme, I also think it can be used to call out specific toxic behaviors in the dating scene, regardless of gender. One of the biggest problems people have with simps, real simps, is their intense lack of self-awareness at times. They love to do all these grand gestures and favors for the person they supposedly care about, without actually caring about what the other person might be feeling in this one-sided relationship. So far from being romantic and adoring, they can come off more sycophantic and sometimes even creepy or stalkerish if they run off the deep end. The stereotype therefore shares plenty in common with the nice guy, or friend zone guy to use a more 2000s term, and is often dubbed as Gen Z's version of the trope. But unlike the nice guy who performs baseline niceness with the instant expectation of sex or affection or a relationship in return, for the most part, at least from what I've seen, simps are more prone to acts of grandeur or more desperate attempts at affection for someone who isn't reciprocating.
I love you so much, please.
And the thing is, even when they are rejected, they apparently still continue pressing on with their acts of devotion. Sometimes in real life, this dynamic may appear consensual. The person on the receiving end may be enjoying all the attention and affection they're getting rather than being creeped out. But I personally feel like if this affection isn't reciprocated on at least a similar level, then perhaps in some cases the person selflessly giving it may just be being taken advantage of emotionally. Not to mention the fact that there may be issues of self-worth or self-esteem at play here, and the other party may just be stringing the other along. It's a complex gray area in these cases. We'll never actually know for sure what the actual dynamic is unless we're actually in it, but if this is the case, then it makes for a pretty toxic relationship. However, I am saying this specifically for face-to-face real-life relationships, because online parasocial ones have a different, unique dynamic going on for them, with different expectations for both parties, as we'll see later on. The line that separates simps from so-called studs is that often the latter receives affection in return, and if not, then they've got the will to walk away or simply stop being an obsessive sycophant for the person they like. Another thing some simps have in common with nice guys is that some of them can eventually do a total 180 and turn into a real unpleasant jerk when they don't get the affection they feel entitled to. From what I've seen, this is quite rare for the stereotype. Most simps seem to stay pretty passive and don't really get outwardly malicious as much as nice guy or nice girl TMs. Now, there's no doubt that a few real life people may have just popped in your head after describing this type of person, but there are also a few pop culture figures that have iconicized, apparently this isn't a word, but I'm making it one, the trope before it was even a thing. So here are my favorite examples. As I said, the simp shares plenty of traits with the nice guy archetype, but whereas the nice guy is typically the main protagonist we're meant to root for, the simp is usually placed in contrast to the guy who gets the girl. Another common cliche among many fictional simps is that they often never express their feelings outright, typically beating around the bush through implicating gestures and grand favors instead. For instance, if you're a cool person who also watches The Office, then you may be familiar with everyone's favorite, Toby Flenderson, Michael Scott's best friend, and Pam's not-so-secret admirer. The dude's behavior is pretty much your textbook example of simpage, performing unreciprocated favors and being overly friendly with Pam to a cringy or even creepy degree in hopes that she'd possibly return his feelings, except he never outright reveals them, in contrast to Jim, who does. And much unlike the Simp's dilemma, Jim's feelings are greatly reciprocated, as they always have been throughout the series, really. Now, the problem with Toby is that even as Pam and Jim eventually pursue a relationship, he continues to try try his luck around Pam even if the chances of them getting together are literally zero, and to make matters worse, even Jim is aware of this. Fortunately though, he never evolves into a full-on douche around her, rather remaining as a pitiful, cautionary tale. Similarly, Gunther on Friends would literally lay down his life for Rachel if it meant a chance of getting together with her, even when her disinterest is clear as day. He literally sits by the sidelines and does her every favor and request, except never actually shooting a shot and being honest about how he feels. Instead, he delusionally acts as if he owes her his life, even apologizing to her the one time he accidentally kisses Phoebe, and stands by seething at every guy who eventually gets her, particularly Ross, who he holds a deep, unjustified hatred for. And while Ross in comparison does come clean about his feelings for her and eventually gets with her, one could also argue that the man is kind of a simp himself, just one of the rare successful ones. He's doted over Rachel since the 9th grade, but fortunately enough, he eventually does express his longtime love for her and eventually wins the girl, only to act like an obsessive, jealous weirdo for fear of losing her to an imaginary other man. For goodness sakes, the schmuck set an entire floor shop to her office in an attempt to, quote, mark his territory.
It was like you were marking your territory. I mean, you might as well have just come in and peed all around my desk.
And when they break up and Rachel eventually moves on and finds other men to be with, he lets his erratic emotions take hold and often attempts to sabotage her new relationships. And here's where we see the harmless simp turn into a full-on nice guy TM.
Really hurt that you would think I would send you any of those things out of anything other than love. Hurt. Can't a guy send a barbershop quartet to his girlfriend's office anymore?
I'm not about to drag Ross's entire character here. He actually is, in fact, my favorite of the bunch just because I find him the funniest. But there's no denying that he turned into a pretty toxic person around the object of his affections. And I guess you could actually plot like an evolutionary process for the trope. It's like simp, and then nice guy or nice girl TM, and then incel. And I just thought I'd add this to our list, but interestingly enough, Thanos himself is also apparently considered a simp among many Marvel fans. Disclaimer, I actually haven't read the comics myself, but through a few Reddit discussions and Comic Drake's fantastic video on the topic, which is great, I've linked to it in my description, Thanos is literally your textbook example of an unhinged simp, and given his galactic power, a pretty terrifying one at that. Basically, one of Thanos' biggest arcs in the comics was his undying, obsessive love for death. Yep. So apparently in the comics, Death's most common form is this smoke show of a woman, and since Thanos' teenage years, has constantly seduced him into doing her bidding. He eventually falls in love with her, and blinded by the thirst, the dude attempts to do anything and everything she requests in an attempt to impress her. This included, but is not limited to, killing animals, killing people, killing every child of every woman he knocked up, and becoming literally God. Man, if that ain't for some fine simpin', I don't know what is. And yes, she was also his motivation for snapping the world in half, and let me just applaud Marvel Studios for changing that up in the films, cause good God. But I don't want to go into too much detail with his whole simp saga, though he's quite possibly one of the most interesting cases for the trope, because Comic Drake's video does an awesome job at breaking down the entire thing, so go check it out. It's quite a ride. So we've covered some of the trope's most well-known figures in pop culture, but how exactly did it find its place in the world of internet memes? Like I said, we can thank the Zoomers. So Simps eventually cemented their meme status, courtesy of everyone's favorite app, TikTok. In 2019, the good old non-dystopian days, a TikTok user by the name of Polo Boy made a video of himself standing in front of the camera with a block of text reading, "If she rants to you about her relationship problems and you comfort her," then the music switches and we get the punchline, "Welcome to Simp Nation." Now this guy, with a handful of other simp-related TikToks he did following this format, took off on the internet, inspiring an entire Simp Nation challenge of TikTokers basically doing the same thing using different scenarios, all ending with the punchline of "Welcome to Simp Nation." Some even stage entire skits pretending to impress a girl as a setup to the joke. So in the same year, the term also started to gain prominence on popular social media threads, this of course including Reddit, Twitter, and 4chan. It started to get used in image memes like this one of a laughing Drax that simply says the word simp. Quite creative, that one. Or this one with Ross. Quite ironic. Or these ones with random anime girls. So you get it, it eventually started to take the form of this popular playground insult that internet folks like to throw at each other. But alongside the birth of these memes came another notable trend known as the Mordecai was a simp meme, where Twitter users started to pile on our man Mordecai from Regular Show, calling the anthropomorphic bird the ultimate example of a simp, the CEO of Simps. if you will. Which, if we're being real, is not far from the truth. So for context, Mordecai is one of regular show's leading characters who's head over heels for this other anthropomorphic bird, Margaret. Throughout the series, he's shown fawning and literally doing everything for her in a desperate attempt to win her affection, all the while completely avoiding just being straight with his feelings. The motherfucker went so far as to murder his own best friend for calling him out.
Hey guys, it's me, trying not to get stung for a second time by the good folks over at Warner Media, but basically this guy literally gets his friend obliterated after being criticized for the simp he is. What a bro.
So yeah, you know, maybe Twitter was onto something. I do find it funny though how this stoner-ass cartoon of a literal bird, raccoon, and talking gumball machine became the subject of actual Twitter discussion. Gotta love the internet. But all this was relatively harmless, all in good fun as they say, even if admittedly some of the Simp Nation memes sent a troubling message to young teens, but we'll get to that. Sadly, silly memes and cartoon jokes weren't the term's only source of popularity. The archetype also became a fairly prominent target of ridicule among the r/MGTOW. And once again, for the lucky and pure out there who have no idea who this community is, let me be your regretful apple of knowledge. MGTOW is basically an acronym for Men Going Their Own Way, a highly misogynistic online community of men who are now aiming to separate themselves from women completely in a world they believe has been corrupted or even destroyed by feminism. So they're basically sexist monks. They have incredibly narrow, generalized views of women, and to quote Wikipedia, MGTOW groups share a belief common among other manosphere groups that women follow a similar pattern in dating and marriage. Young and attractive women are promiscuous and engage in hypergamy, having sex with numerous men and abandoning a man if a higher value man shows interest. They believe women gravitate towards alpha men who are attractive but mistreat them. As the women begin to age, the MGTOW ideology explains that they choose to settle down with beta males who provide for them financially but to whom they deny sex, sometimes choosing to have sex with attractive men outside of their marriage. Finally, the ideology holds that the women will divorce their husbands and that courts will favor the women in divorce proceedings due to what they describe as female privilege. It is a wild and disturbing sector of the internet, and I don't want to get too much into dissecting their ideology because I would be here all day. Unsurprisingly, the community also shares plenty of overlap with incels and pickup artists. How nice. So it's no surprise that these guys also adopted the term just as it was gaining popularity and used it as a prime example of what not to be as a man. Except their definition has been stretched to also include those who are just generally nice and respectful to women. So basically to them, if you've ever complimented a woman, you're a simp. Ever done your female friend a favor? Simp. Did you just hold the door for her, you fucking simp? To these guys, being a simp is a dude who has fallen prey to the clutches of the women's. They have a huge misguided victim complex and just come off as this incredibly bitter subculture, to say the least. I mean, just check out this post from Reddit that reads, "Women demand that men look like a chiseled Adonis, drive a nice car, have a six-figure salary, live in a nice house, etc, etc. But yet most women look like fucking zombies without makeup, usually have a few extra pounds, drive a piece of shit hoop tie or don't even have a car, work a shitty minimum wage job and live in a cockroach-infested studio apartment. They're truly delusional, and the worst part is the simps with good incomes that will give into their demands and turn these worthless thoughts into housewives, sweeping them off their feet. If these simps came to their senses, these bitches would stop looking for the perfect man and start looking for extra large litter boxes for the 20 cats they're gonna get." Sir, who hurt you? But you get it. Their scorn for simps, which also just includes any genuinely nice dude with good game, comes from their rigid notions of how a masculine or alpha dude should act, on top of what I think is bitterness over other guys' success with women. It's why, like I said, the community overlaps with plenty of those from the incel sphere. But it's not just the MGTOWs or the incels who seem to have this broad criteria for what makes a simp. Plenty outside these niche communities have also run with this loose definition of what simps are. Like I said, many have stretched the definition to include men who just perform simple acts of kindness, or who may perform grand acts of affection, but whose feelings are otherwise reciprocated by that person. And I really don't believe these people fall into the actual definition of a simp. They're either being decent humans or they are winning over the girl. So why are they being lumped in with the term? Sadly, those who are quick to call any affectionate guy a simp see strong acts of love, devotion, or emotion from a man, even in a consensual, reciprocated relationship dynamic, as weak, quote-unquote beta male, submissive, pathetic, and let's be real, a lot of this is rooted in very traditional attitudes towards how men and women should behave in a relationship. These people calling men simps for being decently affectionate or appreciative of women see them as lesser men. Because of their outdated idea that being soft and sensitive aren't masculine behaviors. You gotta be tough, you gotta be strong. The emotional, sensitive, and overly mushy stuff, that's for the ladies. Which we all know in this modern day and age is bull. It's also linked to the emotion that as a guy, if you show too much emotion, that's something to be ashamed of, ya. So sending her sweet messages, being in touch with your feelings, and opening up about them to her, basically being whatever Timothy Chalamet has been typecast as, well, you might as well turn in your man card. I am joking, of course, but this trend of using simp to demean even just decent guys who just happen to also be loving and sensitive is linked to and perpetuates this dumb idea. I mean, even in what I would deem a valid use of the term, that is, calling out extreme, sycophantic, unwanted romantic behavior, it's the creepiness, entitlement, and lack of reciprocity that's the problem in those cases. Not the fact that it's a man being that extra and open about his feelings, because like I said, it's not like the ladies are exempt from this type of behavior. On top of that, guys and girls can do nice, affectionate things for each other without the expectation of sex or relationship in return. Careless use of the word simp also often targets guys who do nice things for women without scoring in return, when a lot of the time they may not even be expecting to. This further promotes the idea that guys and gals can't just be friends or do platonic things for each other. Attraction obviously can happen in many of these friendships, so that doesn't mean that nice, sentimental things can't be done for each other without the looming expectation of the D or the P. The evolution of simp also seems to have lumped it in with other male-centric insults like incel or cuck, which also feeds into the flexibility and frequency at which it's used by 12s on the internet. Need we regrettably recall the literal swarm of forever onliners who repeatedly bashed iDubbbz for being a quote-unquote simp because his girlfriend decided to make an OnlyFans? And setting aside the fact that there's literally nothing wrong with this scenario, especially since he outright said that he supports his girlfriend's endeavors, and the people who were literally devastated by this should probably turn to more productive things than obsessing over other people's relationships. I always wondered how the word simp even fit iDubbbz in this context. If anything, wouldn't some of the people paying for his girlfriend's content be the simps? Doesn't make sense. But anyway, on a related note, the hate or shame for simps today also has heavy ties to the online content industry, particularly on Twitch, where plenty of online female streamers have had plenty of criticism, or in worst cases harassment, thrown their way for building large, loyal, mainly male followings through their good looks and sex appeal. Now, I understand that there are legitimate concerns and controversial discussions surrounding Twitch's erratic policies and how they've been pretty lax in a few cases when certain female streamers break the rules, but I'm not talking about the people mad at that. They've got every right to be. I'm specifically focusing on those who dislike these e-girls or female streamers because they think their online space is being invaded or whatever. In fact, in 2017, a popular Twitch partner by the name of Trainwrecks actually got himself suspended by going on an unhinged rant about these creators and calling them all sorts of derogatory names, voicing what seemed to be a lot of people's disdain for these types of creators. Now, I've said my piece targeted towards female content creators who use their sex appeal as an asset, particularly in the cosplay community, so if you're curious, links up there. But those trigger happy with the word simp also have an unsurprising scorn for these women, for what they deem as perpetuating or even banking on simp culture. Now, I feel like it's a bit unfair to put all the blame on these girls. After all, they aren't putting a gun to these guys' heads and telling them to watch and donate to and support their stuff. And also, a lot of the time, it is an actual consensual dynamic where expectations are clear and set. The creator enjoys the support and attention, but their male or female viewers also enjoy giving it, knowing they aren't going to get anything more than temporary acknowledgement or a friendly shout out in return. Both know their place, basically, in this online dynamic, or at least they should. Now, that's not to say that there aren't those crazy entitled ones out there, but they seem to be the minority from what I've seen, read, and watched. Basically, though, these dudes are watching out of their own choice. They're free to keep scrolling, or they're free to simp. But I'm sorry if they regret that at the end of the day, or are disappointed that they aren't forming real relationships with these women. That's on them. And this isn't a problem exclusive to female creators who are single. Many have also stated that even when they say they're in a relationship, thirsty viewers are still gonna thirst and eventually deservedly get the ban if they take it too far. So I feel like blaming these girls for simp culture is using them as a bit of a scapegoat. I get that a lot of social media is used to monetize these sort of parasocial relationships, and I also sympathize with how most of those who are prone to unhealthy simping, are often lonely or unconfident in the dating scene. But of course, at the end of the day, you're responsible for managing your expectations with how you interact and watch these creators. Also, I hardly ever see the same simp insults levied against male creators who also have dedicated donators, so bit of a double standard there. And if I could veer off topic for a few seconds, my take on the whole thing is that if these female streamers aren't breaking the rules, and again, I am aware Twitch needs to be held accountable for vague or inconsistent policies, but if these girls are just looking sexy and getting attention from that, I mean, it may not be your thing, it ain't really mine, but raging against them just seems so unnecessary and such a waste of energy. Them doing their thing on Twitch doesn't eliminate the other genres of content on the platform, so go watch those if the booba ain't your thing. As I am with most things, if they aren't hurting anybody, just close your eyes, look away, go outside, touch grass. But anyway, in response to the rise of e-girls, female content creators, and those who simp for them, there came the birth of the subreddit No Simp September, in which guys congregate online to form a support group against simping during the entirety of September. Now the problem with this is once again having an unnecessarily broad definition for the term, so not only do innocent donations to streamers fall under their category of simping, but also just generally any positive interaction with women online, they actively discourage this, deeming them as destructive simp behaviors. Judging by the rules and passionate content shared within the forum, the guys involved seem to lack an internal self-control, struggling with an addiction to these online parasocial relationships. Many of them seem to be guys who feel shame over an unfulfilled desire for sex or a romantic relationship. An article by the Pittsburgh Current actually explored this subreddit and explained how these psychological struggles have led to their scorn of female influencers / sex workers, and by extension, those who support them, as these women offer these men a chance to feel good about the things that otherwise haunt them, even if that feeling is fleeting. Because it doesn't lead to actual sexual or romantic fulfillment, they deem these women manipulative and their supporters weak-willed simps. And here's where the problem lies with these no-simp crusaders, and hopefully what they're aiming to fix. They gotta change the expectations they have of these female content creators. Specifically, they must accept that these girls can provide sexual gratification or even just perceived companionship without genuine reciprocity, because that's exactly what they're doing, and they know that, and most of their fans do too. As the article reads, entitlement, and not the women whose attention they feel entitled to, is the real source of the no simp's unhappiness. Alright, so we've explored the evolution of the simp meme, and how the broadened meaning of the term promotes this misguided hate and some pretty troubling social attitudes that persist today, but most of these issues primarily revolve around guys, even when the word itself doesn't actually have a gender. So are there female simps? Well, yeah, they're just looked upon differently. So female simps, who are basically just male simps, but you know, female, generally they don't receive as much hate or ridicule for their behavior as their male counterparts. People seem to be more forgiving towards the simpets, apparently a real term there according to Urban Dictionary, and it's because these overly affectionate actions are typically expected of their gender and their role in a romantic heterosexual relationship. Traditionally, female partners are seen as being the more emotional, sensitive, attached personality in the relationship. It's why male simps get ridiculed because, as discussed, exerting these behaviors make them look less masculine, which is a basis for shame apparently. And because of these gendered stereotypes, the obsessive, adoring woman is often let off the hook, more often than not, at least in the context of romance and dating. And we see this in media too. As much as I love Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, I can only imagine how much more creeped out audiences would be if it were a male character in the leading role. Well, I guess we don't have to imagine. You exists after all. But this stalkery, intense devotion is typically portrayed as sympathetic and even quirky among female characters, while the male ones are usually depicted as unhinged and even dangerous. There's even a trope for this called stalking is funny if it is female after male. It's an unfair double standard, and I mean even I'm not immune to falling for it at times. But while I shouldn't have to say it, stalking an unhealthy romantic obsession should be deemed as creepy regardless of gender. And don't get me wrong, not all female simps in media are portrayed in this extreme way. Some of them are just depicted as being more affectionate and devoted to a guy who doesn't quite reciprocate in the same way. But again, we see them as more sympathetic, while the guys are seen as more pathetic. However, interestingly enough, this double standard seems to cease when we look at female simps in the context of them adoring public figures. In the same way that we see guys constantly mocked for obsessing over their favorite female influencers or streamers, so are women towards their favorite celebrities, particularly those in the music industry. Look at how often female fans of Justin Bieber Bieber, One Direction, and if you want to go way back in the day, the Beatles were often sneered at for their passionate, seemingly all-consuming love for these men. They're a stereotype so notorious, in fact, society has given them another name altogether: the dreaded raving fangirl. In contrast to the fairly tame definitions Urban Dictionary gave female simps, describing them as simply being a woman overly attracted to a man, their definition of fangirl is far less charitable, defining them as a rabid breed of human female who is obsessed with either a fictional character or actor, similar to the breed of fanboy. Fangirls congregate at anime conventions and LiveJournal and have been known to glomp, grope, and tackle when encountering said obsessions. So as it states, men also have their version of the persona known as the fanboy, though it seems like for guys, the term simp has taken over the act of adoring female public figures, while the term fanboy is reserved for obsessing over a type of media or entertainment. Think Marvel fanboys, Star Wars fanboys, sports fanboys. Fangirls, on the other hand, seem to encompass women simping after male celebrities as well as having a passionate love for certain pop culture fandoms. Now, there's something to be said about how media traditionally popular among fangirls have been historically derided by most at a much more unforgiving level compared to the media loved by fanboys, but that's a topic for another time. So despite the fact that simpy behavior in the actual toxic sense is also prevalent among women, and really anyone of any gender or sexuality isn't safe from the plague of Simp Nation, it's still unfortunately a stereotype that mainly targets guys and has sadly to some extent evolved to put them down for just simply being nice or affectionate towards women, even when they reciprocate. But fret not, my dudes, for the same generation that popularized this term to begin with are also here to save the day. While many have sadly co-opted the term for unnecessarily demeaning purposes, lately it's gained a more ironic status in the world of memes, also courtesy of Gen Z and TikTok, the same community that launched it to online fame. Many now use it as slang for simply just being a fan of something, whether it's a Hollywood celebrity, a band, a fandom, or even just a type of food. This kind of makes it lose the unironically malicious, negative meaning behind it, transforming it into simply a self-aware or self-deprecating joke. Gretchen McCulloch, a linguist and author of the book Because Internet, compared its use to terms like stan or trash, as in I'm trash for this. She also deems it as a self-conscious approach to fandom, in which one preemptively puts themselves down so that other people can't. On top of this, TikTok also saw a modified version of the Simp Nation trend last year, where girlfriends basically used it to celebrate their loving boyfriends. How sweet. So basically it's been turned into a harmless, amusing joke, once again. In case it wasn't clear, I am not in a crusade against the word. Honestly, most of the people I know do use it in these ironic comedic ways, and like I mentioned, I do think it has value in calling out truly negative behavior. Should expressing someone's feelings reach certain extremes, like say repetitively pestering a person even after rejection, or I don't know, buying them a whole ass house within weeks of dating, and then yeah, simp is a useful term to discourage that clownery in my opinion. If only we can strip it of its gendered stereotype so it's just this neutral term to call out general bullshittery. But I also do think it's worth highlighting how at the same time it has been taken seriously by some people, some of them influential, and has encouraged this popular, obnoxious culture of alpha versus beta maleness, actively discouraging even the simplest of nice things done for a woman. I mean, not only does it discourage positive behavior in dating, but the actual nice, decent guys who may not already be confident in the dating scene may take an even further hit to their self-esteem by being unironically and arbitrarily mocked by this label. So thankfully, memes are here to turn things around, as they always do. So as always, I'd like to hear what you guys think about simps, the popularity of the term, and quote-unquote simp culture. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I do love learning more and getting new ideas from you guys on these contentious topics, I guess. But just before I hop on out, I do want to thank Skillshare once again for sponsoring this video. As you guys might know, Skillshare is this awesome online community where millions of creatives come together to learn new skills or pick up new interests, and there are literally thousands of classes to choose from areas like digital design, traditional art, or photography, to niche workshops in filmmaking, boosting your productivity, and even creating your own YouTube channel. One might say that I am a simp for certain YouTubers out there, particularly in the comedy and video essay genres. And a really cool class I've been following on Skillshare is this one by comedian Matt Balasai, titled Going Viral: Write, Film, and Make Content People Share. The guy has a super engaging way of breaking down what makes content both viral and valuable for social media audiences. So as someone who attempts to do that, his insight really helped, and I highly recommend it for anyone looking to join in the Wild West that is online content creation. Nation. Additionally, you get to enjoy these classes ad-free as the platform is curated specifically for learning, and if you think they've got a diverse, generous catalog now, it only gets bigger as they're constantly launching new premium classes. Though it's normally $10 a month with an annual subscription, the first 1,000 of my subs to click the link in my description will get a free trial of their premium membership. If you're gonna simp for something, simp for knowledge. Thanks for sticking around. If you like video essays like this one or just general pop culture commentary type of content, feel free to subscribe because I've got a lot more of these coming up. According to some of you guys, YouTube hasn't been promoting my latest videos on your subscription feeds, which is weird. I'm not sure why that is. But if you'd like a heads up on my newest uploads, don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't think I've gone incognito. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.